76ers, a huge game on Christmas Day, a victory over the Boston Celtics. But was it enough for people to start believing in this team for real? We're going to break that down and the upcoming stretch coming up.
You are Locked On 76ers, your daily Philadelphia 76ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 76ers. We're your hosts, Keith Pompey and Kayla Santiago, and the NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins as well. Make sure you visit the FanDuel.com to get started. So we have a ton to touch on today. Before we get to that, if you want even more Sixers, you can sign up for our free daily newsletter on LockedOnDaily.com. Make sure you go check that out today. Once again, that's on LockedOnDaily.com. So we're going to touch on the Philadelphia 76ers upcoming stretch. Not even that, too. They've really only gotten their wins 4 times against teams that were 500 and above. So is that enough to really look at this team and say, okay, they're good going forward, it's all good? Or is it too early to tell, and are people getting too excited too early? But first and foremost, let's talk about the upcoming stretch, because Keith, we touched on a while ago about the month of December was a big time to win for the Philadelphia 76ers, that they needed to come out on top in these games. And now they have a real chance to, with Joel Embiid or not, they absolutely should on the road against the Jazz and the Trailblazers. That'll finish out the year in December. We'll start with that.
Yeah, you know what? It's they absolutely should.
But
it also gets a little tricky, and the reason why it gets tricky now, they should, but the only reason why it gets tricky is because we're thinking about injuries, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's no KJ Martin; he's going to be out. We have to see how long Drummond is going to be out. Now, Drummond did practice and did go through his warm-ups before the Christmas Day game. So that gives you a little bit of, hope or whatever, or optimism for the team that he'll play. But then there's also, Eric Gordon is out, a guy. So to me, it's one of those things where we just need to see. But on paper, yeah, they should win. I mean, to be honest with you, if we want to talk about this overall stretch, you look at it, the 76ers should win the next 2 games, right?
Yep.
They should. They should also beat not the Detroit Pistons. They should also beat the Brooklyn Nets. So, I look at it, the Sixers should be favored, and at least 4 the next 5. I also think they should beat Sacramento. It's going to be tough, but you look at it that they should be favored to win 4 of the next 5 games.
And then you look even deeper into the schedule too, and we're looking kind of all of January and the end of December, or the beginning of January, I should say. The Suns, that might be a tough game as well. The Wizards, that absolutely should be a win in that contest as well. Then you have the Pelicans, the Magic will be tough, and the Thunder will really be tough. That wraps up January 14th, and then you have that on the back-to-back. So I'm curious to see how the 76ers kind of manage Joel Embiid and Paul George, because you have the Thunder January 14th, and then you have the New York Knicks on January 15th, a back-to-back from that standpoint. And we know that Joel Embiid isn't playing in back-to-backs this season. But when I look at the Eastern Conference right now, and we've touched on this so many times, it is weak. At the end of the day, it is weak at this point. It's not as competitive right now as the Western. So I think when you're the Philadelphia 76ers, the playoffs and play-in and all that stuff is far-fetched. But at the same time, you have a really good chance to gain some ground. When you look at the strength of the schedule or the non-strength of the schedule, Keith, where do you think the Sixers are going to get in the most rut, probably going up into that January 15th game?
Yeah, the problem is we got to figure out, like, A, who's going to play, and B, what days Joel going to be off. I think they should be fine the next 2 games, right? I do. Even though we talk about Drummond and this and that, you hope that he can be able to come back. But I think the games that they're going to have to struggle against are, I think Golden State is going to be a struggle. Sacramento could be a tough one to them as well, just because of the center, and they also have a pretty good point guard. So I think that could be a struggle, but I don't see them beating Phoenix and going up to, and then the Knicks, that back to back, that home back to back against OKC and the Knicks is going to be a tough one for them. But aside from that, you would think that they would be favored against Brooklyn, favored against the Washington, favored against the Pelicans. Orlando may be a tough one too, but the Jazz in Portland, I mean, they're going to be, excuse me, favored against all those teams.
That they will. And, talking about the standings too, they're 11 and 17 right now. The Nets just 12 wins, so they're only one game behind the Nets. The Bulls just 13 wins as well, in addition to the Pistons and the Pacers behind them too. So when you look at this, Keith, I don't necessarily think that they're too far out from even getting to that 8th or 7th spot. Do you think there is any way that they can crawl up into possibly the top 6 coming up in the stretch that we're talking about? It's going to be tough because the Heat right now, I mean, they only have 15 wins, but once again, the Philadelphia 76ers, they got to consistently win. And on the other side, teams have to start losing. Do you see by any means the 76ers throughout the stretch maybe getting up to 6th? I think that's possibly where they could get. I don't think they get any higher than that throughout that early January period.
I don't think they'll get all the way up to 6 at that point. I mean, I think like we're talking about them climbing for winning 4 games in like 9 games. You know what I mean? Like or how many games it is. I mean, but I think they can gradually go up. I mean, because when we look at it, we're saying how many games is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I mean, my thing is if all the other teams ahead of them, all lose together, yeah. But I don't see it happening that way. I think it's going to be something that's going to be gradual. You know what I mean? And then when we face it, I mean, let's be real. Like the Sixers have, they had a great victory over one quality team, right? Recently, for the most part, they've been beating a bunch of bobos. So we'll see. And then the West, like you said, the West is a whole lot stiffer. Now, I do think that they'll win some of these games, but I just don't think that it's going to be one of those things where we look up at January the 10th and the Sixers are like the 5th seed already. I just don't see that happen. But I do see them maybe possibly being the 8th seed or something like that. But I don't know if they'll, make that gradual leap that quick.
And once again, it is really early to tell. I think that, they could, I might have to agree with you on that one. Actually, I look at it and I just say, okay, you're looking at a lot of teams that have to lose from that standpoint. But you're looking in this situation, okay, can the Sixers get into a real play-in spot? Okay, can they get in the 10th? Yeah. Can they get past that? Can they get into 8th where they don't have to worry about not having an opportunity to play in another game if they can get that 7-8 seed? Probably at this point. Now, that's far down the line once again for the Philadelphia 76ers. But this is a team that we were talking about, should they just completely tank for Cooper Flag if Joel Embiid cannot play and be healthy? Now, clearly, they're not in that position anymore, even if he were to go down due to just how many games they're trying to look to win going forward. But I look at this Jazz matchup too, and the Utah Jazz is absolutely a team that they should beat. I mean, Jazz's defense ranks 3rd worst in the NBA. They give up 119.5 points per game throughout their contest, but their offense has played better, putting up 110 points per game, 21st ranked in the league. For the Philadelphia 76ers, I'm going to ask you this, Keith. Is this a trap game at all? And I use that term lightly because everybody is excited about the Boston Celtics victory in terms of the Philadelphia 76ers. The team's excited. Joel Embiid was waving bye to the Boston Celtics. Do they go into this game, carry over that same momentum? Is it more of maybe a trap game where they go in and say, well, the Jazz aren't that good. Maybe they can just beat them and have a good night and they end up losing? Because we've seen the Philadelphia 76ers lose to a team that they shouldn't lose to before. What's your thought? Is this a trap game whatsoever, or you think the 76ers are good to go coming up in this matchup?
I mean, it could be a trap game. I mean,
Yeah,
the
never
thing
know,
is,
right?
no, here's the thing. The 76ers intended to practice today in Philadelphia before they went out there. They're not going to practice now, but I was under the impression that they would prefer to practice in Salt Lake City. I was under the impression that they probably would have, I know 2 days ago was Christmas, but it's one of those things where if it was me, I would have probably flown out there early, had a practice yesterday, and then practice today, and then play the game tomorrow. And here's my reasoning: is the altitude. And Joel Embiid doesn't typically do well in the altitude. And there's a lot of games out there that he doesn't play against Utah and when they go to Denver. So when we talk about trap game, yeah, it could be because you look at this team, and this team just lost last night to the Trailblazers 122 to 120 and dropped to 7-22. So you look at it that it could be easy peasy. But the problem is, it's kind of like, how is Joel Embiid going to do running up and down the floor in that altitude? So yes, it is a trap game. It could become a trap game.
And that's some really good insight there, because I don't think a lot of people understand just the difference in that and how different it could be practicing in Philadelphia versus practicing out there and getting used to that before you get in full game play. It can be very different. It's just like if you were to go to Philadelphia, maybe on a walk or a hike or going for a run, versus if you were going to go do that in Utah as well. It is very, very different. Now, granted, you're dealing with the outside elements, but still. So it can be different for Joel Embiid, and we're going to see how they step up to that challenge. It's very interesting that they are practicing in Philadelphia and they're not going a little bit early to practice in Utah. So we will wait and see if it works out for them this time around. It should, but it also could be a trap game for the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, I think the biggest conversation and the biggest takeaway that a lot of people want to have is this team is back. This team is ready to go. They beat the Boston Celtics. But are people jumping on the bandwagon a little bit too soon? Are people getting a little bit too excited early on for this team that hasn't shown much success against teams that are 500 and above? We're going to break that all down when we come back on Locked On 76ers. Make sure you go check out Robinhood Gold today. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% on uninvested cash and can be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for just $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold, so make sure you go check it out today. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. The rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. Once again, make sure you go sign up today. All right, so the Philadelphia 76ers, and I know a lot of people are going to be upset about this one, but guys, we have to be realistic here. When you're looking at their schedule and teams that they won against, 4 wins against teams that are 500 or above at this point. So yes, the wins against the Hornets are fantastic and sweeping them throughout the season, but you're talking about beating teams that are good, beating teams that the Philadelphia 76ers are proving that they should be beating with a Joel Embiid, a Paul George, and a Tyrese Maxey. Keith, we talked about it a little bit yesterday, but we didn't dive into it. Where are you with the Philadelphia 76ers? Because I know a lot of it can relate to health and, the pieces going in and out for this team, but do you feel like maybe they rose up a level after beating the Boston Celtics, or are you kind of holding your horses a little bit and waiting to see how this thing plays out?
I mean, I think that was a huge win for the 76ers, right? So I would have to say yes and no. Yes, meaning they did show some potential and they did show that they can play. But at the same time, we're looking at a team that's 4-15 against teams with at least 500 records. So they did a lot of good things against substandard opponents. Is that game was a good one for confidence, but again, it was like that was a team where they played who one starter didn't play, the other starter left at halftime, right? But you can say the 76ers had injuries. I just feel like right now that there are going to be people who are going to get extremely excited about the Sixers, and they're going to be like, they're back, they're back, they're back. But we're not going to know if they're back until we see what Joel Embiid can do, how his health holds up, and what they do against other quality teams. Because, yes, they beat Boston. They were blown out by Cleveland, and they were in a dogfight and won that against the Spurs. So yeah, it's like I still think it's still going to be a wait and see. But it was a big win, but it's still a waiting to see how good the Sixers actually are.
My takeaway from this whole thing is that looking into this season, this is who the 76ers were supposed to be. I'm not saying that they were going to be first or second in the East, but they were supposed to be surprising people, beating teams like the Cavs and the Boston Celtics. Now, granted, they didn't beat the Cavs in that last matchup, but because of the unit and the big three of Joel Embiid, Paul George, and Tyrese Maxey, right? That was the expectation. And then those expectations were extremely lowered when we were talking about, oh, maybe the 76ers need to tank. It all depends on the health of Joel Embiid at the end of the day. I'm waiting until the Sixers can prove something if they get out of the second round of the playoffs. Personally, that's what I'm waiting for. But when you look at it from a standpoint like that, the 76ers are showing what they can be. They're showing that they can beat quality teams. I think that they can continue to do that because this core group has so much talent. Now, granted, it is a wait and see game because we're relying on the health of Joel Embiid, and that has been up and down the entirety of his career. But if you're going to ask me right now what I think and my value and my takeaway from this team should be beating teams like the Boston Celtics. I'm not saying in a 7-game series. I'm saying throughout the regular season schedule because of the talent that they have. They have Joel Embiid. They have Tyrese Maxey. They have Paul George. And when that starts to click, I think this team could be a lot of different people. So when I look at it, I can't rely on any of that because Joel Embiid hasn't proven that he can stay healthy. He's not going to play back-to-backs. Paul George really hasn't proven he can stay healthy either, and he hasn't gotten going with Joel Embiid. But, Keith, I want to ask you this from the Eastern Conference standpoint. You just see
Hold up. Let me go back. Let's go back.
Let's rewind.
You honestly think they could beat the Celtics?
Not in a 7-game series, not in the playoffs, but I do think
okay.
even if Porzingis stayed in that game, the 76ers still have a chance. Now, granted, the Sixers weren't 100% either. I'm not saying in the playoffs. No, I don't think that at all. I don't think they beat the Cavs. I don't think they beat the Knicks, but go ahead.
Yeah, the problem that the Sixers have right now is Paul George is a little bit too inconsistent. I mean,
Right.
real rap though, if we want to talk about it, we could go over the slumps. Do you know statistically this is Paul George's second worst season in the NBA
Mm-hmm.
as far as field goal percentage and shooting behind the three. So like this is closer to pandemic P than it is playoff P or whatever you want to call it. So to me, until he gets his stuff together, I'm a little bit on the fence. You know what I mean? Because unfortunately, they beat the Celtics in spite of him.
Right.
He didn't help him. And as good as Caleb Martin was, as good as Yabusele was, those are role players. You can't rely on them to produce all the time, especially on the road. So that's where I have my pause at. Like I never and going into the season, I personally never expected them to beat the Celtics because I don't think they're deep enough. I just did. Yeah, I just didn't. That's just
even on any given night. I'm not talking about the playoffs on that because if you look at the schedule,
anything can happen on any given night. But when we look at the pecking order,
right,
you got an old 76ers roster. You have Joel Embiid, who has injury history. You have Paul George, who has injury history. I mean, you have Maxey, who's playing well. But then I look at the Boston Celtics, and I'm saying to myself, objectively, I'm saying to myself, they got a bunch of horses. The thing about the Boston Celtics also is that, when you keep beating a team and then their team gets up for you, but you don't get up for them, So the next time they play is really going to be something to pay attention to, right?
Right.
But I don't know. Like I just don't think that. And I like the Sixers, what they're trying to do, but their roster, they got a bunch of old dudes coming off the bench, and Paul George and Joel Embiid are two players with extensive injury histories that they're relying on, and the Boston Celtics are just in their prime.
And it's crazy to think because I would worry about Paul George being fully pandemic P if that's how he played when Joel Embiid wasn't in the lineup. But we've seen big flashes of Paul George too. So I'm like, what is going on here? Why can't he play with Joel Embiid? This is the whole reason you got Paul George to be able to play alongside Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid. And that's when he can't figure it out. So I'm still waiting for that. That's the thing that I'm most concerned about. I'm waiting for going forward to see what happens. We'll see if all those guys, it looks like they'll play against the Utah Jazz. So I'm waiting for that chemistry to consistently work out. And I'm not saying Paul George needs to have a 35-point night, but he can't go 0 for 7 from beyond the arc. He can't just have open shots and not be able to knock them down. Everybody can have a bad shooting night, but why is it consistently when Joel Embiid is the lineup? So do I think that the Sixers can beat the Celtics on a given night? I mean, they showed it. I do. I do have belief in that. Now, I'm not saying they're going to beat them in a playoff series because I absolutely do not think that is true unless Joel Embiid is Superman and doesn't get hurt and stays completely healthy 24/7, which we all know realistically is not going to happen. So we'll touch on more with the Philadelphia 76ers and the matchup that they have coming up with the Utah Jazz as well. And we're going to dive into a little bit more of a playoff P or pandemic P. My biggest takeaway from this, though, is that the Philadelphia 76ers, I think that with this core group and with this unit, they can go on and win some games. Have they shown me enough as a core group? No, but this is what they should be doing. And this is what Paul George and all the company was signed on to do. So we'll break more down coming up on the other side. Well, we got some rivalry coming up. Another Philadelphia team we have to touch on. It's the Eagles and the Cowboys. Let us know who in the comments that you got. Even without Jalen Hurts, I think the Eagles would come out on top of that game. But nobody cares about my opinion on the NFL and the Eagles and the Cowboys. But what you do care about is FanDuel and the odds that you can bet and maybe win some moolah. So, hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return to FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Eagles, Cowboys, they're happening on Sunday. Eagles right now -7.5. Jalen's still not clear to play at this moment. That's Jalen Hurts, of course, went out with a concussion against the Commanders game that the Philadelphia Eagles did end up dropping. So this could be a big game for them to try to stay in that #2 seed in the NFL. So we'll see if that's able to happen in the National League for the Philadelphia Eagles, or if you think the Cowboys might come out on top, let us know as well. If you want to hit that -7.5 line right now, you can check it out on right now on FanDuel.com. Visit FanDuel today, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, so the Jazz is next up for the Philadelphia 76ers, happening the action tomorrow at 9:30 p.m. And when you look at it for the 76ers, these are games that they should win. But Keith, I know we want to dive into Paul George, and that's, I think, one main thing I'm at least looking for to see if that chemistry can get together, if Paul George can stop these struggles or what's going on there. But what are some things that you're looking out for in this matchup after the 76ers were able to pull off a big win against the Celtics? What do you want to see from this team?
And I want to see who's going to play. I mean, to me, that's the
Yeah.
thing. Like, yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing. If Joel Embiid plays, I want to see how his body responds. I mean, because he looked a little gassed. You know, the last game and the other one that he played in, what was it, the Spurs early on. So I just want to see how his body responds. But the main thing is, how are they going to, who's going to play? And then another thing is, Caleb Martin had back-to-back solid 3-point shooting games. One game against the Spurs, he shot 3 for 5 from 3. Against Boston, he shot 7 for 9. Is he going to be able to continue that on? But so those are the things that I really want to see.
It just has been terrible for the Philadelphia 76ers in terms of being healthy, right? So my biggest thing is seeing Paul George, of course. We've alluded to that. Will we see pandemic P and will we see playoff P? Not really sure what we're looking at the moment because it just has not clicked with this unit so far. But also, can Kayla Martin stay healthy and continue that? And I like that you mentioned that because he's been injured a little bit this season early on already. What is in the air in Philadelphia? What's going on? Does it worry you too, Keith, that a lot of we talk about, you worry about some of these players going forward. Can the 76ers keep this up? Does it worry you with all the different injuries that consistently keep happening? I mean, I know it's part of the game in the NBA, but it just seems like every single time there can never be a nice week for the Philadelphia 76ers where one person isn't injured.
Yeah, it concerns you. I mean, but it's unfortunately, but it's the Sixers way, right? I mean, this is I've been covering the Sixers since the 2013-14 season, and they've always had injuries. Maybe not as many as this year, but there's always been something, injury to a person that who's an important piece to the team. I mean, even gets to a point when Joel Embiid fell down on Christmas night in the warm-ups. There was a lot of
Right.
people like, "Oh," I'm like, "Of course he fell down. That's what happens." Like, there's always something with this team when it comes to injury. So, yeah, I mean, if I'm Nick Nurse, I gotta be concerned because this is part of the reason why they don't have any continuity. But unfortunately, it's par for the course when it comes to the Sixers.
That it is. I think they need to start walking around in some bubble wrap and just stay that way forever because no matter what they do, it always seems like there is a recipe for an injury with the Philadelphia 76ers. So we'll wait and see who plays against the Jazz. Keith, I know anything can happen on any given night. I'm not going to ask for a score prediction, but do you think the Philadelphia 76ers come out on top in this game?
It's a tough one. I think you do think they do, but again, you don't know who's playing, right?
Right.
And it's also the altitude type thing. So in order for me to give an accurate one, I would like to know who's all playing. But yeah, you do assume that I mean, just because they won 8 out of the last 11, they've been playing better ball. Um, you would assume that they would play, but again, if Joel Embiid doesn't play, then it could get a little dicey to me. It could. And even if he does play, we got to figure out and find out and watch and pay attention to see what he does. See how his body responds to the altitude.
We're gonna wait and see. I think that they all need to play. I need to see the chemistry. If I'm Nick Nurse, it's not a rest day for Joel Embiid because Paul George, Joel Embiid, and Tyrese Maxey haven't played enough time together, and Paul George needs to get it going because it's great if Paul George can score, but not great if Joel Embiid's not in the lineup. So if Joel doesn't play and Paul George has a good night, that's great. We've already seen that though. The Philadelphia 76ers need to figure out that big three, that chemistry, and that only happens if they play together.
Here's the deal. Here's the deal. Like, first of all, the one thing that I got to say is when we're sitting here and we're unsure that they're going to beat the Utah Jazz, then that basically lets us know that maybe this team isn't quite there quite yet, right? You know what I mean? Because if they were there,
Right.
then we wouldn't have to ask that question. But here's the thing about Paul George, and I think this is an important stat to bring up. Like, you talk about how he looks without Joel Embiid, right? The last time they played without Joel Embiid, Paul George scored a season high 33 points. He made 13 to 20 shots. He was 6 to 9 on threes. You remember he moved into like 10th place, all time on 3-point list, whatever. And then all of a sudden he has 8 assists. Well, since that, in the 4 games since that, Paul George is averaging 11.8 points, right? He's shooting 29.1% from the field and 16% on threes. Now he is having 7 rebounds, 4.3 assists, 1.8 steals, but his just offense has disappeared. In one of those games, you can't say it was all Joel Embiid because one of those games, the one where they went to Cleveland, he had 11 points on 4 for 12 shooting,
Right.
and he was 1 for 4 on 3. So, you know what I mean? It's kind of like he is in a major slump right now, and it's something that he has to get out of.
I think so too. And we are like, okay, do we worry about all these injuries? We have that conversation. I am worried about Paul George. I'm not going to say, oh, he's pandemic P. He's definitely not playoff P, though. I will tell you that right now. He is not even close. So, this was a big off-season signing for the Philadelphia 76ers. They got him because they want to get past the second round. Now, will that happen this year? It doesn't look super likely at this very moment, just how this season has gone. But at the same time, I mean, are the 76ers just striking out with signings? Because you get James Harden, he kind of has some of the same issues of the slumps that he had, not wanting to play in the playoffs. I shouldn't say not wanting to play, but taking 2 shots in an elimination game. And then you go sign Paul George, another guy that's really not in his prime either, a little bit older, kind of injury prone at this point. It's kind of the same cycle there. So is this something that you expected, Keith, before we send things off? With Paul George coming in, these struggles continuing to happen with or without Joel Embiid? Because, listen, this is the second time now that it seems like it might just not be working out.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things where, like you said, did I expect it? In a way, I'm gonna say no, just because I felt Paul George was going to be, Paul George, right? Like he's a 9-time All Star, 5-time All NBA type of performer. But I will say this. I will say this. Every big free agent acquisition that they got has struggled here for the most part. Jimmy Butler struggled until they gave him the ball, right? You look at James Harden. He struggled a little bit. Tobias Harris struggled. And the one thing that a lot of people are going to be upset when they find out about is that Tobias Harris numbers were actually better than Paul George's. So I feel like these guys have to figure out how to play next to Joel Embiid. Typically the NBA is a guards league, is a perimeter players league. You become the focal point of the offense. Right here is the center. You have to play off of him. And I think that some guys, it takes them a while to adjust to that. And I think that's what's going on now. But, you look at it and everybody's like ripping Paul George. They're ripping all these other people. They even ripped Al Horford, saying he was a bum when he came here. But as we found out, it's kind of like guys are having a tough time coexisting with Embiid a little bit, and they have to figure that out in order for Paul George to play better.
Now, is that more of the coach trying to figure it out and trying to set up some schemes and some plays to make it work? Or is that simply just there's not enough room on the floor for another star to play alongside, or another established star, I should say, because Tyrese Maxey is a star in his own right, but he was up and coming and played and grew alongside Joel Embiid. We're talking about bringing in stars that have already kind of had their prime and did everything like that. Where do you kind of see it from that standpoint?
I think it's something that it can't be the coach because we initially said that, but we're on the third coach now.
Yeah, right. It's fire everybody, fire everybody,
Yeah,
fire
yeah.
everybody. Yeah.
It's the same thing. So I feel like you know they just got to work together. They got to get on the same level. You got to realize that it was a couple games where Paul George, when he was baking, you can't have him go to the corner and Joel just jacking up everything. And I know Joel wants to be that guy, but in order for it to work, he also has to sacrifice things, right? And let's face it, yeah, it's easy to say tell the coach, yeah, tell him to do it, but he's the best player. This is how he plays. So I feel like there has to become a common ground between the players to where they're able to, everybody takes a little bit of less to help out. And in this point, it just seems like Joel gets to eat, Maxie gets to eat, but the third guy doesn't get to eat. And that's just how it is. So I think that, George, they have to figure out a way to play better together, but it just seems like guys do it. And let's face it, it's different. You're going to a place where they have a dominant center and your offense runs through him. People don't have that. They don't have that in today's NBA. It's typically a guard or a perimeter, or a wing player. And so this is something different and players have to adjust.
Well, listen, they need to set up a placemat and some food for Paul George at his table so they can also have him eat as well, because that is the only way that this team will get out of this rut and to where they want to be and why they signed him initially, possibly out of the second round, if they can get there. I still don't think they're anywhere near that yet, but that's the reason they bring somebody like him in. So they got to figure it out. And that's why I look at this Jazz game and I say, I want to see them all play so we can finally see, okay, maybe what's really going on. The back-to-back games, not necessarily back-to-back in terms of calendar date, but 2 consecutive games where we kind of see this unit play together once again and figure out what is happening. And if it just Paul George can't get it going, or is it something with Joel Embiid? Let us know what you guys all think. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Locked On 76ers. For Keith Pompey, I'm Kayla Santiago saying so long, and we'll see you all next time.